Lawyers of Reddit, what's the most laughable I am not a lawyer, but claim you've ever read? This wasn't online, but a guy was representing himself pro se against a client of the legal clinic I worked at the time. She had a semi-public job doing promotion for a local pro sports team. Some dude did a brief fan interview with her at a game, and that lone interaction sparked a 5-year stalking saga during which she got married and had kids with someone else that culminated in the stalker making the following claim. He wanted a paternity test for her children, because he was convinced she had paid someone to follow him, find out when he masturbates, break into his home, steal his semen, and deliver it back to her. Apparently she had then impregnated herself with his Kleenex semen and her 2 small children were actually his. I've never seen a judge looked as shocked, or as tired, as I did on the day that motion for paternity was denied. As a lawyer, I love seeing all of the Facebook posts telling Facebook what they do and do not consent to. It's the online equivalent of Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy. When I was a judicial intern, I saw an arraignment where the defendant claimed the court had no power over her, because she was a sovereign citizen who did not recognize the federal or state governments. Later learned that her sole source of income was Social Security. I once saw a defendant argue for a not guilty verdict because there was no Mr. or Mrs. Commonwealth who testified. Obviously the charges were Commonwealth v. defendant. He doesn't understand that. He was found guilty. The judge did not appreciate that. In general, people arguing for an hour before realizing they live in different countries. I'm a lawyer in the US, and for some reason people are obsessed with common law marriage. I see people on Reddit and even hear them IRL warning other people about how you've lived with her for more than X years. You're common law married, so you have to take that into account, or well, we've been living in the same apartment together for X years, so we're common law married now. Common law marriage is only a thing that can be done in a small handful of US states now, and there are requirements to it. You have to hold yourself out as being married, live together, present yourselves to the world as being married, etc. You're not going to wake up one day and accidentally be common law married. This is great. You just saved me the money I set aside for my common law divorce. I've found that Redditors are absolutely obsessed with correcting each other with the idea that assault and battery are often confused, and that assault only ever means to put someone in fear of imminent harm, to the point where if I even point out that that is only true sometimes, in some places, I will be downvoted. Roughly a third of states define assault as some version of purposely, knowingly or recklessly causes bodily injury to another. I had a non-lawyer try to tell me that testimony was not reliable evidence and that a judge could not rely upon it in making a factual determination. This was in the context of a small claims case I was helping my client prepare for. It was my client's word against the opposing parties, plus some photographs he was planning on introducing. I told the opposing party that I'll guess we'll see what the judge does. Spoiler: the judge found my client's testimony much more compelling and ruled in his favor. Copyright infringement. All you have to do is change 3 things. That's called a derivative work. Still copyright infringement. What you actually have to do is not copy. My favorite is if you ask an undercover officer if he is a police officer, he can't legally lie to you. Yes he can. Had an undercover in on a deposition once and he had been wearing a wire for part of the investigation. He was asked if he was undercover by a co-defendant and his response was yeah, obviously. I'm here buying drugs from you guys cause I'm an undercover police officer. I have a wire hidden under my beard and everything, you moron. He said it with such immense sarcasm they didn't think twice about it and sold him a trafficking amount of cocaine. My favorite. The judge cannot determine this matter because he is a member of the Freemasons, and the Freemasons do not believe in the concept of private property. This case ended with the non-lawyer accusing everyone of being a Freemason. The same non-lawyer also ran an appeal in that case based on the fact that the judge was not a real judge, because the judge had not taken his oath of office. The non-lawyer had dug up a transcript of the judge's swearing-in ceremony which read Judge Smith takes oath of office. When the judge took his oath, instead of the actual words of the oath, The non-lawyer referred to outdated and repealed laws from 1730, which said all oaths had to be transcribed word for word, as a basis for the fact that the judge was not a real judge. If his interpretation was correct, I think no current judge in Australia is a real judge. My answer is actually basically all of the "I am not a lawyer, but" claims. The funny thing about being a lawyer is that the answer is almost always "it depends." Sure, the laws generally stay the same, but the outcomes are so contingent upon the facts that you can never know with certainty how something will turn out. Thus, my answer for 90+% of my clients is it depends on who the judge is, who shows up to testify, what the witnesses say, what theme opposing counsel goes with, etc. More importantly, we are not allowed to guarantee results, and for good reason. The simple fact of the matter is judges, juries, prosecutors, and opposing counsel can make different decisions based on identical facts and laws. I think the only time I am not a lawyer, but would be appropriate, is if someone is saying I am not a lawyer, but you need to consult with an attorney. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm fairly certain that I could frame a dog for murder. One of my clients was told by someone on the staff of the nursing home where her mother lives that if an enduring power of attorney, basically a power of attorney made in contemplation of future mental incapacity, that unlike most powers of attorney does not become invalid if the donor becomes incapacitated, is voided if the original staples that held the pages together are removed. I can see a tiny grain of truth to this, in that if the validity of the document was contested, the fact that it had been taken apart and stapled together again might be some evidence to support that, but there is no way that evidence alone would determine the issue. And don't even get me started about people who use the term hearsay but don't know what it means. This has become an epidemic. Guy claimed he could lawyer himself because he played Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. The sovereign citizen stuff is my favorite. The United States is a corporation and the law of the seas applies. Just look at the fringe on that flag. I do not consent to jurisdiction. Runner-up is you can't show me any law that requires me to pay federal income tax. My favorite was on advice for home invasion. According to the poster, you could shoot to kill anyone who comes in uninvited. Absolutely not the case. Because self-defense by definition requires reasonable force. It's more lenient in some states and even more lenient in rural areas. But it's just irresponsible to spread this kind of misinformation. For anyone saying anything along the lines of NUHR, you can always use lethal force if X or NUHR, in this state, comma. No, that's not what the law says. Anywhere. Reasonable force is an intentionally vague concept, and it's always interpreted case by case. Just because the defendant felt threatened doesn't mean a majority of the jury in his case would, even if this is usually the case. Stand your ground laws, castle doctrine, they exist to support defensive use of force, but you're always bound by reasonable force, and oftentimes, reasonable force can be lethal, but the judge and jury are the people who will decide whether or not you were justified. A group of people who may not share your same views put themselves in your shoes and decide if you did the right thing. The jury decides. Not you. Not your sheriff. Not your CCW instructor. If you're on trial for the use of force for self-defense, you absolutely shouldn't feel smug about it. The law has an unpleasant habit of surprising everyone. Stop making blanket statements about the law. If the law was black and white, we wouldn't need attorneys at all. My two favorites are when people talk about the McDonald's coffee case as an example of greedy plaintiffs taking advantage of the system, or, conversely, when they say X company has an army of lawyers on staff to fight the case. I have had to explain the McDonald's case way too many times. I'm a recovering patent attorney who now works at a major research university doing work in autonomous vehicles, AI, and a number of other high-tech fields. The number of people who don't understand patents, particularly on Reddit, is astounding, and the number of people who comment as if they know what they are talking about is also unreal. I shouldn't be surprised by the comments alone because it's Reddit, but the number of upvotes that follow are mind-boggling. I stop myself from submitting a response to those types of posts on a daily basis because it's just not worth my time. A tale from back in my public defender-ing days. Sovereign citizens are a special kind of stupid. Percentage-wise, I don't know how many of them are true believers and how many think they've just found some clever loophole or another. At any rate, they were always the most interesting clients. One of them was a young gent who decided to represent another buddy of his to spin his nonsense to the judge. Unfortunately, the fellow who would become my client was a regular defendant in that same courtroom, and everyone there knew he wasn't a lawyer. When he was arrested, which is to say immediately, the judge was not swayed by his argument that he was acting of counsel rather than practicing law without a license. The operating a motor vehicle charge which would follow was only semi-related. On a first appearance for a criminal matter, the defendant going pro se representing himself. Note: he is not incarcerated and only has to check in with the court once per week over the phone on release. I demand this case be dismissed pursuant to my 14th Amendment right not to be deprived from liberty. Judge. Counselor. Do you have a response? Me. Without due process of law, which is why we're here for you to read, Mr. Defendant, his rights. Your Honor. Met someone who said they knew everything about the law and was studying to be a lawyer. Turns out she was temping as a paralegal for the better part of a week. I browse public freakout a lot, and it never fails to make me laugh when people are being filmed throwing a tantrum and they start screaming about how it's illegal and they are going to call up their lawyer and sue them. Most of these AskReddit threads asking questions of lawyers are just strings of comments from people saying I'm not a lawyer but, and then speculating wildly about the law. It's entertaining, but useless to actually getting the question answered. As a lawyer, I have actually gotten downvoted in quite a few threads for politely correcting people. I pretty much avoid any threads related to the law now. Am legally, but I quit a corporate lawyer. Basically no one understands fair use and copyright. I keep seeing people analyzing songs and art and calling everything plagiarism and copyright infringement. I'm not talking songs, but stuff like chord progressions or character names. Just because something exists within a work doesn't make it the author's exclusive property. Anything on legal advice. Do not go there for actual legal advice. I go there to laugh because come on, in real practice, though, we get those nutty per plaintiffs suing for millions or billions because of some slight, or because the government doesn't have jurisdiction over them as free MURICANS, or because the sovereign individuals. I once had a person claim that within there was no such thing as the adversarial system and that we were just trying to inflame a contested divorce. Should mention we live in a common law system and both parties had retained separate counsel. I work a lot in real estate law and I generally enjoy reading anything that comes up related to landlord-tenant laws. Generally speaking, Reddit loves to jump on the illegal and don't pay bandwagon. These are terrible pieces of advice. I have seen plenty of people recommend solutions that would likely result in eviction. I usually hop in, politely inform the poster that laws vary from state to state and that OP should review local tenant laws. This just happened this week. I've had some pretty rough ones. But this lady, I represent a landlord who is trying to evict a tenant for multiple lease violations. Tenant sends my clients a cease and desist letter for harassment. She didn't like that they told her she had to keep the house clean, or that she refused to permit them entry to the premises for repair work. That's harassment. She's told them on several occasions that they have to fix this or that, and it has to be fixed yesterday, but then has every excuse in the book why they can't do it with reasonable notice that the landlord is coming 24 hours or more, even so far as to call the cops on my client when he comes out at the prescribed period of time. Client gets tired of crabby lady, and sends me in to read the lease to figure out how to get rid of her. Well, she's a nuisance to the neighborhood. She has the cops at the house weekly. She has a dirty house. She hasn't paid her utilities in months. Lease says it's her responsibility, etc. I count 8 violations total, and some have multiple occasions. So I send her out the notice that her lease is terminated and she needs to vacate by a certain date. She ignores termination letter and informs me that utilities are being cut off. and I need to grant her permission to get an extension to pay the city utility bills. I ask her when cutoff is, because if it's past the date we told her to leave, it won't matter. Tenant proceeds to tell me she's sure that I'm aware of the law and statutes in my state, with my license to practice, and that she's done with my nonsense. Water was cut off that day. My clients, concerned that children, including a diabetic, are without water, call city to have it reconnected and put in their name. I inform the tenant that she will have water that night, and that this does not mean the lease is still active. We have terminated the lease, and she must move out. She proceeds to tell me that I'm harassing her, that I could lose my license, and that I need to stop harassing her immediately, and insinuates that I don't understand English, or the law. She may not be a lawyer, but she knows her rights, and I'm violating her rights, which is discrimination. I've learned only two things from this. 1. Tenant does not, in fact, know her rights. 2. Tenant does not, in fact, understand my state's laws, or the English language. I filed the eviction proceedings days ago. We're just waiting for our summons to get her to court, so we can get her out. For whatever reason, a lot of people do not understand that only the government, not private citizens or corporations, can violate your rights. The most obvious example is that Facebook, Twitter, etc., are well within their rights kicking Alex Jones off the platforms. A more complicated example involves the Fourth Amendment's search and seizure rules. The police are not allowed to unreasonably search you. There's nothing in the Constitution barring a private citizen from unreasonably searching you and handing over any evidence to the police, though.